Hi there, I'm back, and I'm gonna share. I'm doing another clip about my coming right back from our Chicago trip, and I was mentioning the last one where there was another coach that had gone to a 10-day silent retreat, Vipassana, and then the two of us came back on the same day. I came back from our trip to Chicago, where I was like felt like I was immersed in the 3D with between college applications and decisions, and the old life that I used to live and the person I used to be when I was there. And then this coach that I was working with was like had gone to Vipassana, which is like I would characterize as 5D, very much about spirituality and like healing trauma and clearing the system and tuning into the energy and really starting to go deep into that kind of that spiritual path. And so we met, and what was so fascinating is like in one of the meetings, he'd asked like what was the reason I'd left Google, as part of like sharing kind of our past and our experience and so on. And I'd shared, like the story that I'd shared around tuning into my intuition and then starting to like um, see these experiences as reflections and starting to ride these tsunamis of like challenging experiences and seeing it more as an unfolding mystery and adventure, right? So I had the whole storyline, and at the end of it he said, well, what's the real reason you left Google, or some version of that. I remember thinking like, what the hell, like I just told you. um and what he said was like, because he'd just come back from this really deep meditation where he was really attuned to the energy. And so he said like, I'm just sensing that there's more to the story than what you're sharing. Like part of it feels true and resonant, part of it doesn't. And I was like, okay, let me like share more information then. And then as I started sharing, double clicking a little bit on like what was going on during that time, like what was I experiencing, like when I really double click from the summary down into like some of the weeds. So I started sharing like, well, it was a really tough place for me to work because I felt like I was being asked to move like further and further away from the things that I really love to do, which was really like helping to create safe spaces and you know like helping people tune into their like inner state and like their emotion and sensation and understanding emotional behavioral patterns and using that to like understand like their reactions to situations and starting to like learn how to co-regulate with others, move and understand other people's behavioral patterns and start to use that to deepen understanding and develop more resilience and more connection. And these were all the kinds of things I was focused on. And the organization really wanted me to focus on operations, very tactical, very strategic kinds of activities. And they specifically didn't want me to be working on this kind of stuff. And I knew this to be like when people are in high states of stress, especially given everything that's happening in the environment, in the organization, in the industry, politically, environmentally, like culturally, people's productivity and well-being was like rock bottom. And so just sticking to the tactical, like operational, just wasn't working. Like the levels of stress and anxiety and depression and sickness and fear from layoffs and so on was just killing productivity, killing well-being. And I found that getting to the root cause of that by helping people understand what they're responding with and how to learn how to clear and manage and ground, how to support each other, how to create safe spaces so that people can heal and connect and then start to like come up for air and be able to be far more productive, creative. And then what I realized was, as I started to immerse into like the sentiment that led me to like, I started getting all these kind of stark realizations. So, it was for a long time and I shared this in the first video. It's like the company recruits people that are very ambitious, very accomplished, brings them in a level or two below where they might be in the industry, and then limits promotion. So you get this pressure cooker. And these are very accomplished individuals, like often type A, type threes, a lot of them that are looking for reward and recognition, extrinsic validation, accomplishment. And so the worst sides of ourselves emerges in the competition, and like people become like what I characterize as sharks and snakes. And I used to ask, like, can I be a dolphin in a sea of sharks and snakes? Like, or do you get eaten? And I assumed, like, you're probably going to get eaten. I don't know how you would survive that. And I kept sticking around, hoping that I could change or influence, and attain success that I so desperately wanted in a place that I admired so much, before I came. And it just kept beating me down, like over and over and over. Because the metrics and the incentive systems and the culture and the, kind of the structures really ended up causing people to really focus on themselves, the individual versus the collective. And it was kind of like lone rangers, or like, people who would really try to take out others. So there, and on the surface, it was like positive and smiles. Beneath the surface, there was all of this like energy, toxic energy that was floating. People who didn't trust each other, who were just like looking at this, like, what is it going to take for me to get promoted? And I remember never feeling as small as I did when I was there in a lot of the different places. And all of my expertise that I'd had for like 20 years prior, like, didn't matter. They weren't valued. Their tools and techniques and processes and strategies were not of interest to most of the leadership that was in, the individuals that had the most leadership or influence, which often were the engineering VPs and directors. And, because we were so profitable from ads, it was what were their motivations and interests may have nothing to do with bottom line or top-down hierarchy. It might have to do with their desire to get promoted or their pet project, or, so it was like being in the jungle, and having to figure out who are the people you need to influence in order to succeed. So it was incredibly exhausting. And it was only when I started learning how to like move through that did I learn how to navigate it. But the final straw for me, and the reason I ended up, becoming really clear that I needed to leave, was something I didn't share in the first episode that I talked about why I left Google. And that was, so when I did the chakra healing program I mentioned with a spiritual mentor, she went through each of the 7 chakras, starting with the first, up to the 7th, and she asked to be shown the past life that caused most blocking of the energy in that chakra. And then she shared it in intricate detail. And then as we proceeded, I started being able to see more and feel more and more. And then what we would do is that, when she would share that detail, she would do some healing and clearing of that energy. She would share with me and ask what the messages and learnings were from that life. And then my assignment during the week in between each one was to, like, anything that came up for me in terms of like for additional clearing and healing, but then to also speak to that part of me, about how far I'd come and what I'd learned from it and where I was now, how I was happy and healthy, and like they're going into the depths of that darkness allowed me to go to the heights of my light in this life, and so on. So all these beautiful things that came out of that. Well, when we went to the 2nd chakra, which, as I've mentioned in a bunch of videos, is like, it's identity, it's creativity, it's sexual identity, and so on. So it's like, that's the 2nd chakra, desire. And so if a child either you inherit it or it's reinforced in childhood. Child, not when they're doing their terrible, going through their terrible twos, I want what I want and I want it now, right? They throw these tantrums. If they're made to feel ashamed or guilty for having those desires, then that's when the energy will start to get blocked. And then you'll start to have problems around identity and sexual identity and so on as a result of that. And then the 5th chakra, which is expression of desire, the voice, will also be affected, because if you're not allowed to, have your desire, then the expression of it is also stunted. So you end up with blocks in the 5th chakra. But the other, the energy can also go to the 3rd chakra, which is the seat of the ego, and it's about drive. So you can become overly aggressive and overdriven, if that, and that's what I was doing, growing up then. It was all about chasing the reward and recognition, and like very aggressively, like action-oriented kind of thing, is what ended up happening. But what she talked about in that life, the life that came up, was, I'm just going to say there's a trigger alert here for those of you that may want to plug your ears or forward it here. But so the life that she saw was basically, I was sold off as a child bride at the age of, I think she thought was maybe between 6 and 8. to an uncle that was probably like 40, 35 or 40 or something. And, when I wouldn't submit to sex with him, then after a couple of weeks, as a way to put me in my place, they had all the men in the family come and gang rape me. And I fought whatever, and like ended up like dislocating a shoulder, and like my uterus got totally damaged, and there was obviously crazy amounts of trauma. And what ended up happening was I had, as I was like moving through these really challenging experiences at Google, I remember at one point, and this was after this program, there was someone, like one of the leaders in the organization, would just like, I couldn't understand at the time, like pick on me, like single me out, and like come after me, and like make my life really, really hard, and make me feel really small, exclude me, and discount me, and dismiss me, and humiliate me, and so on. And I tried a whole bunch of different things, and then I just ended, it was like super triggering. And then, like the leadership asked for two of us to get together and see if we could resolve our differences. And once we went to dinner, and when I came back, I felt even more disturbed on like more levels. And I was like, something's just not right here. Something else is going on. And so the spiritual mentor that I worked with, she had this program where you could send her the first name of someone in an email. Nothing else, no context, no scenarios. You could just send the name and say, tell me like what my relationship, or what am I meant to learn, is what I asked from this relationship with this person. And she sends a 15-minute recording back. And what she said was that this person was like one of the guys in that scenario, in that second life, reincarnated now. He's going to betray me, and it's got remnants of that life, that energy. And she said it was someone that was actually related to you. So then like participated in this attack. So it was like even a larger betrayal. I felt even more betrayed. And this person was doing things to like betray me in this work scenario, in terms of behind the scenes, and like stabbing in the back and so on. And then what was interesting was I started seeing a series of characters like that appearing as I was sharing that first video. More and more challenging scenarios and people started arising. So I started, as an example, there was like another individual who, the VP of engineering and my boss had started asking if I'd be willing to take on this new program. And they both kind of called me out of the blue on one day, and I was like, why is everyone suddenly asking me about this program? Like, what's wrong? What's going on with this program? Why do you guys want to move it to me? And I heard that a peer of mine working with this engineering director was like, they were like having mental health issues because it was so traumatic to work with this director. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, I don't want this. Like, and they said, no, we're moving it to you because you seem to be able to work with, challenging characters more easily. So they wouldn't even give me a choice. They just moved this person to me. And so out of curiosity, I sent a note to Janine, or this spiritual mentor that I work with. And, I sent the first name, and she came back and said that he was actually the leader of the pack that, in this second chakra life. So when I went to the meeting, I was like mortified. Like, what is going to happen? I'm going to honor everything that arises. If I lose my shit, I'm just going to honor that. And so I came to the meeting. I didn't do any prep. I said, I'm just going to honor whatever comes up, see what comes up and honor it. And so in this meeting, the thing that came into my mind was like, ask him about his background, let him tell his story. Like I could just sense that he's kind of like big ego, kind of a big character or whatever. And he got into fights with everyone. My boss didn't even like him. So he started talking about how he went to engineering, and, he went to a great engineering school, and then he lived in the Middle East, and then he worked in machine learning, so he was sharing all these things about his background. And then at some point, like, almost close to the end of the meeting, he asked me about mine. And my intuition told me, like, I don't normally like to bring up my degrees because it tends to like either create jealousy or crazy expectations that I can't meet them, or I'm scared I won't be able to meet them, and then it kind of stresses me out. So I don't like to bring them up. But in this case, my intuition was telling me, like, bring it up. So then I said, we have a few things in common. And I started sharing, I went to MIT for engineering, and, I could tell he was immediately impressed. Like, where'd you go for grad school? And I shared I went to, Harvard Business School. So then I could see his eyes light up, in terms of like being really impressed. And then I said, I lived in the Middle East also. And I spent half my childhood in the Middle East. And then, again, it's like, wow. And then I said I was also in machine learning. And then he said, wait a minute. Were you the Shalini Verma that was in machine learning and won the Leaving a Legacy award. I was like, that was a joke. He's like, no, I can't believe I get to work with you. You're like a legend. I was thinking like, what the hell? And then suddenly he started like, it was like this term in psychology where someone says they go unzipped. He started sharing all this stuff, like things he'd done. He was like confessing to me, people he'd hurt, and like because of his actions, people had gotten laid off, or like how he'd done things that he regretted, and problems that he had, and situations that he ran into. I was just sitting there watching, like, what in the world is going on? And when I just watched, as I was listening to him, just watched him, suddenly I saw him as this like little kid that desperately wanted attention. And so when and just seeking that, and all of my anger, all of my like fear just disintegrated. And when I came out of the meeting, the one thing that my intuition was telling me was like, just add his program to your weekly report that goes out to the VPs. I think the next day I added like one line that we're like kicking it off, or I don't know, some one line status. He was over the moon. He's like, before I'd done anything, he's like, she's the best leader we've ever had working with us on the program. And, he was like super supportive and super complimentary, like had no problems working with him after that. And my peer that had been working with him was like, what did you do? How can you possibly have compassion for this person? Like, he's committed crimes against humanity, like long list of things that he's done. Are you working with him now? Like, is he having you commit crime too? Like, how are you guys getting along? And what I realized when I told him was that you're just like a little kid, who was seeking attention. If they don't get the attention, they'll even do things that are bad, right? They'll create problems or be troublemakers just to get attention because they want attention so badly. So when I saw him as this little kid, my instinct was to like give him the attention that he's seeking. Then he doesn't have to commit any crimes because he's getting exactly what he needs and wants. So and then it allowed me to like move and release that part of me that was like traumatized, another layer of it, to release it. But it was such a deep wound that there were more and more characters like that kept appearing. And at one point, there was a gang of directors, or there was a gang of VPs that were coming after me. And I remember I was like losing sleep. I couldn't even sleep. It was so stressful. And there was like a couple of like, I think it was a director or VP that was like willing to like lie, cheat, and steal, basically, like saying stuff behind the scenes just to poison the wells and like badmouth me because I wasn't doing what they wanted, and my people weren't doing exactly what they wanted. So it was like this, manipulative process or whatever that was really toxic. And I remember like it was at such a level like of toxicity and manipulation, like systematic, that like it was like the energy of evil practically. And I remember like not even sleeping. And at one point I was like, okay, I'm going to do a reading with this spiritual mentor of mine because it's so extreme. And there's got to be something going on here. And when I did that reading with her, what she shared was the scene that she was shown was there was a merry-go-round that was like spinning at blazing speed, like it was unhinged. And she said on this merry-go-round, it's like the two of us are looking at it, almost like in a Christmas story, like back at our life kind of thing. And she said, on this merry-go-round are scenes of death and destruction. There are all these scenes from past lives and like this current life of like death and like darkness and mayhem and murder and all this really, really dark scenes. And she said, you can go back around, another round on the merry-go-round if you want. No judgment. Or you can step over this threshold because this is a replay of like, what happened in that life is now happening again energetically. And now it's a question of like, do you want to step over this threshold? You're being invited to do that. Or do you want to get back on the merry-go-round? And I was like, leave Google? I'm not ready to do that. And she said, there's no obligation and there's no rush. But let me ask you a question. How do you feel when you go there? And I immediately like, I don't like going there. Like the darkness that I feel and like the low vibration and the sheer level of stress and anxiety and like darkness is so high. I hate going there. And what she said was like, what if it was one of your kids that they said you're in a place where you don't feel like you're treated well. You're feeling discounted and dismissed and disregarded. Would you say like, just suck it up and do it? It's like, God, no. I'd say, get the fuck out of there. And she's like, oh, so think of your energy bodies as your babies. Like, come on. And then she's like, let me ask you another question. How would you feel leaving? And immediately, like as soon as she said it, like I went into this like my energy just I could feel the shift. Like I shifted into an altered state of consciousness practically. And she immediately was like, "Whoa, your energy is like completely changed. You look totally different." And she was like, "You have so many gifts and your power is so contained in this place." And then she said, like, just like in that life where they gang raped you, she said, that's what you're allowing them to do to you here energetically. That's what's happening to you. Your energy is getting drained in this place. Like you're not meant to be there any longer. And I knew when I got off that call, like, that's it. Like, and the thought of stepping out was such a gloriously freeing sentiment. Like, I just knew, like, I had never had more conviction about anything at that point. And when I left, like, wow, one of the things that she'd shared in a later session was like what happened after, that incident. And she said they trapped me in a room, and they'd like beaten my spirit down pretty good. And they kept me trapped in that room. So I even I had to go to the bathroom in that room. There was no bathroom in there. So it was like living in like pretty like horrendous conditions. And they pretty minimal food or whatever. So, and I was still wearing the same dress that I came in like a few years earlier, the same dress. And there was at one point in one of the lives that she'd see, the post-life scenario, whatever, she saw that there was something had happened to the town, and like either it was attacked or bombed or something had happened, and like everyone had left. And so then, I can't, apparently I like, there was no noise, nobody was coming in. It was like a few days had passed. I ended up peeking to see what was going on and realized nobody was there. And then I like kind of, came out quietly and realized there was no one in the town. So then I started like kind of in a daze, like leaving, like I was free. And I stumbled upon this river. And she said that this dress that I'd been wearing for I don't know how many years, like 3-4 years, was covered in like semen, blood, and shit. And I like took this dress off and I like got into the river just to like clear, like be cleansed of like all of that trauma. And that's how I felt when I stepped out the door, man. I felt that level of freedom. And I didn't look back. I still, like, I don't look back. And the part that was, and when I realized it, like, and I was like sharing it, it was like, I couldn't share that story. Like, who the hell's gonna believe that story? It was like so crazy. Like, everyone would think it was crazy. And so instead, what I did was I ended up picking the pieces of the story that I thought people could relate to, but it was all the positive components, like, shared in a really positive light, which was definitely elements of it, and that's what allowed me to leave, but it wasn't the whole story. And it wasn't like the crystal clarity I had about why I needed to leave wasn't part of that sharing. And, this coach that I shared it with, he said, that I think people would have more resonance and respect for this version of the story than the first one you shared, which feels like a storyline. It feels like a narrative that you've put together that is kind of that all positive. And it was interesting, like when I came to this place of like kind of shell-shocked, because part of what I was realizing is like, without the story, who am I without my stories? Like I felt a little bit like, I'm a type 3, it's all about the image and like the story, the facade that we often will put up of what we want people, how we want people to see us. And I remember like feeling this, like, it was like dread or like this emptiness of, who am I without the story? Like, I'm like the little guy that comes out from behind the curtain from the Wizard of Oz, So I kind of left like shell-shocked. And what was interesting was while I was feeling all these really strong emotions, I was like, I felt like I was going to start, like, I was feeling this really tight knot in my gut, like made of tar and like blackness or shadow or something. And I remember feeling it, like touching it. And I just closed my eyes because I felt like I was like, it felt clogged. I was going to start like, something was coming up and I was going to start crying or something. So I just kind of closed my eyes and tuned into it. And then this coach, this friend of mine, actually was like tuned in, was able to like feel what I was feeling. But then his heart opened. He was able to like, he described it as like, he felt like it was a fountain of like energy, of water, energy, cooling energy coming out of his heart. And it was like flowing into the gut, in his gut, where he was feeling like my tight knot. And as he was doing that, I started getting this image of like, the knot kind of like stretching, almost like expanding and then shrinking and loosening. And then it was like shrinking. It was shrinking into what looked like a drain in the bottom of my gut, maybe getting grounded or something. And it was shrinking. And then like I came to this place of like, it didn't disappear, but it got much, much smaller. And I was in awe, like that, of the capability, like powerful healer here, man, that I was in the midst of. And I was still like kind of like shell shocked, like grounded, much more grounded, but still really shell shocked. And I left, like it was kind of this, we were both feeling kind of this groundedness. Then I left and like still kind of in the state of like shock or emptiness or like, I don't know what it was, but started driving home. Halfway home, I just started sobbing. Like I could feel that, like the rest of that kind of just releasing and moving through me. And I remember saying like, I don't know if I can even tell my husband this full story, And what he'd said was like, you might be surprised, like, so I decided when I got home, I kind of wanted to share, get it off my chest and like share, but I wasn't sure, like I wasn't ready. And so my husband asked me, Rohit asked me, he's like, so how'd your meeting go? Like, we're working on this, building this platform. And like, I said, well, a lot of it's about helping people move through their fears and insecurities. And I discovered one of my own. And he's like, like, which one? And then I said, well, and I kind of casually said as I was walking by, I'm like, the reason I ended up, I left Google. And then I think he could see my face or pick up my energy. And he's like, come over here. Like, and I as soon as he turned to me and gave me his attention, I just started crying. I started sobbing. And I was like, I'm feeling it. I shared like, what was like, what happened and what was the real reason I left and like how it made me feel. And the way he responded was so beautiful. He pulled me really close and he was like, good you left. It was like, I'm so proud of you for leaving and honoring that. And it's like, that's a much better reason than the one that you've been sharing with me. Like, that's one I can respect and I can hold space for. It was so moving and it was so cathartic. And it was such a load off. It's like amazing. So I've realized since then, and I'm going to try to keep these short. So I'm going to do another video around some of the other amazing realizations that have come from really like trusting others, like becoming vulnerable, like to people that can help me see my blind spots and like challenge me, call my BS stories, and help me get to some of these underlying like feelings of guilt or shame or assumptions that I make about what I think people want to hear or how I want them to see me, and letting go of the stories. So I'm going through massive shifts right now because I'm letting go of all of these stories and I'm getting to some of the underlying fears and wounds that really hold me back from being, like who I truly am, like why I'm here. And I just have come out of like major contractions and like going really deep into the depths of my darkness, which I'm going to share in the next video. But I just wanted to share with you what I've discovered about my departure from Google. Thanks so much.